Okay, and welcome back. Then next turn, we are in early May 1852, and we have to say there has been no further battle at Adrianople. But let's look through some of the developments on the Western Front. Then our army is sitting tight, still stuck in a defensive posture. Rita Pasha is still insisting that he is not prepared to engage in any offensive actions. Wonderful, predictable though, but it is what it is. We have to kind of roll with it. And shades of George McClellan in the American Civil War, but we have to sort of just wait, really, sit tight. We cannot sort of, in the last analysis, he's in command of that army. We cannot sort of force him to go onto the offensive. In the meantime, we wait for Khurshid Pasha. 5 days' time, he'll be landing and joining Rita's force. The Russians have sat tight. They still seem to have a full stockpile of supplies, so I don't know how many supply trains they have attached, but for the time being they're okay. Be interesting to know what their ammunition is, because there are two components to the supply, of course. One is supply, which is your foodstuff, spare boots, and so on. The other is ammunition, and they have engaged in a fairly significant battle. Obviously, they did suffer heavy losses, but it may be the case that they may be low on ammunition. We don't know, but they have not pulled back. But I think I can see why they haven't pulled back. One development is in the territory they captured in Constanta, we can see the arrival of forces with a commander, Prince Alexander Baryatinsky, and it appears that he is in command of 2 cavalry divisions. That's going to be about 10,000 men, 1 Cossack division, and of light cavalry, and 1 regular cavalry division comprised of 2 light cavalry, 2 regular cavalry regiments. And my thinking is that the plan here, they're sitting tight, they have supplies for the time being, they've recovered some of their organisation after their defeat. They're just simply sitting in the field outside Adrianople across from our force, and they have not done anything in a fortnight, and our force hasn't either, because Rita Pasha is insisting on sitting tight and letting the Russians sort of determine what happens. Our window for exploiting that victory then has sort of closed. But with 2 cavalry divisions, 10,000 men, I think obviously the plan is going to be to open up contiguous territory between what they hold here and their army in Aderne or Adrianople. It doesn't mean that they will have to deal with the garrison we have at Varna, which 10,000 cavalry may be enough to do. This garrison is 12,000 men, and it's 12,000 infantry. It's not behind any kind of walls or anything. It's not in a fortress, but it does occupy the town. So we'll see what happens there. This is a much softer target than Plevna. So we'll see what happens, but my thinking is that is inevitably the plan, to use mobile forces to open up a landway and keep that force supplied, and therefore keep their main army close to the centre of power, close to Constantinople. And really all we need is Rita Pasha to be activated, to be in a position where he determines that he can engage in an attack. It may be that the Russians will attack next turn. We'll have to have a look. In terms of our forces arrayed, our order of battle, of course we still have 3 army corps, 1 cavalry division, and 2 independent artillery regiments, plus pioneers, engineers, affording them a nice dig-in bonus, military police, which allows the speed up of recovery of cohesion. Now, in terms of our reserves, I noticed that the reserve corps that we deposited into the citadel has received replacements, and because it is inside city walls, has enjoyed a much faster increase in cohesion. So to that end, we are going to bring the reserve army corps, drop that into Rita Pasha's force, and of course we'll have a command penalty of 10% now because we will have too many troops. So what we're going to do is, we notice that Abu Karim Nadir's force still requires some rest. It still has kind of cohesion issues. So what we're going to do actually is we're going to break that force up. We're going to deposit these guys into Adrianople, and we'll assign Abu Karim's staff to the reserve army corps. That beefs up our force, and that means that we can't, in terms of our kind of teeth arms, in terms of our field army, we have troops that are well rested, their cohesion is good, and they're ready to engage in combat. It sort of keeps our posture really, really strong. The cavalry division has begun to receive some replacements. Then it looks like one of the regiments has received enough replacements to be at full strength, and we have formed another entire new heavy cavalry division. For this cavalry division to be finished off, we need 2 additional cavalry regiments, and there will be 2 light cavalry regiments. So that's it in the west. We have secured 100% control back over Varna on account of our garrison inside Varna. In terms of Rumelia, we've bumped up our military control to 68%. Of course, this is only 1,500 men. It's a very small force. We have got this force set to retreat if engaged. My thinking is likely this cavalry, these 2 cavalry divisions are going to begin hurtling to the south, and we'll probably try and engage these guys, so they'll fall back if that happens. Not much we can do about what's going on up here, really. You know, our forces are tied up. We have to keep our forces in place in Adrianople, and we'll see what happens. Now, we can see that the fleet did bombard Russian positions. Let's have a look. Afflicted. Okay, yeah, so we landed 8 hits and suffered none in return. So they engaged in a fairly small kind of barrage. We have again spotted Russian troops moving at sea. We're going to kind of conduct one last standing patrol, I think, one last sortie into the Black Sea. I don't think this artillery barrage is going to be tremendously effective. It's clear that only really a small portion of the Russian forces within the range of these guns at this time. Before they run out of ammunition supplies, we'll conduct a quick standing patrol, and we might deposit the fleet into either Trabzon or Sinop. So it takes 8 days to kind of reach the eastern Black Sea, and then I think after that we will be looking at putting those guys back. Now, in terms of the east, this army corps is 1 day away. It's still not in Erzurum. It feels like, I mean, it's only really been, like, what, a month, but it's felt like an eternity that corps has been marching. I think once it gets to Erzurum, we'll get these guys into the city, into the citadel at Erzurum as soon as possible. This will speed up its recovery, its cohesion recovery. One thing that we can see now is that the fortress at Kars is partially breached. So Russian guns are doing their work. They're wearing down the citadel. The structure still provides some defensive benefit, but it is the case that, yeah, I mean, we can also see that ammunition is, the garrison is beginning to kind of work through its ammunition. They've got 85% capacity at this time, and they still have surprisingly some supplies and ammunition inside the city, but they are becoming increasingly vulnerable now. So yeah, there's there is a bit of urgency now to this situation. Cavalry division will arrive in 12 days. Weather's fairly clear now, so we're getting, this is the kind of campaign season already. May through to September, weather is going to be clear. Units are going to move much more quickly, and a lot of the big battles are going to take place during this period. So hopefully by early June, I'm thinking, we're going to be in a position to move against Kars. If they press an assault on Kars, because the structure's partially breached, which, sort of erodes, if you like, or sort of compromises the defensive posture of the garrison, the fortress garrison, they may do that. That may not be the worst thing that happens. My hope is they don't do it in the kind of May period, May to late May, the next term, essentially. Because what we want to do is for them to do it, and even if they're successful, they will take losses. It will affect their organisation, because they're going to be pressing for an assault, and even against a structure which is breached, they're still assaulting 41,000 men. And they're going to be doing it through breaches, through bottlenecks. So theoretically, this army should suffer some considerable losses and some organisational losses. If we've got an army in place to exploit that with clear weather, I mean, how long would it take? 12 days, okay. So weather being as it is, if it keeps like this, if we don't suddenly have some kind of midsummer rain, then it would take us 12 days to move into Kars, hopefully slam into an army that is depleted a little bit, is tired, is disorganised after an assault against Kars. That's kind of the plan in the east, really, and that will force that army back. We can retake Kars. That'll buy us maybe another few months, and yeah, that's the plan in the east. Now, we have had some reports elsewhere. If we look at Aden, The colonial fort in Aden of only 400 men, besieged since, God, October, November last year, has finally fallen. I mean, the heroes of Aden won't be forgotten. It was only 400 men, and it was a bit of a last-minute decision to try and build a fort there. It has tied up, of course, some of the Yemeni forces. Now, some Yemeni forces have moved north, and they're now besieging our other colonial fort at Sana'a, which had a cavalry division, Khurshid Pasha's old cavalry division. We're now going to sortie these guys outside the city, because whilst the city is surrounded, they're not going to get any supplies. And we're going to move the cavalry division in. It's going to arrive in one day. We're hoping that these two forces combined will do the deed, if you like. We'll kind of lift the siege at Sana'a, force these Yemeni forces back, and again just buy us a little bit of elbow room, a bit of time. The main thing really we're looking for in Aden is, these are very small forces. Bear in mind, we're talking about, this is a division, but it's 2 brigades. It's 14,000 men. These aren't huge forces, so these aren't going to be missed to the north or anything like that. In the north, we're dealing with much larger kinds of units, army corps and this sort of thing. So these forces aren't massively required to the north. They're not going to tip the balance, for example, in the siege at Kars or anything like that. We have more to lose removing these forces from this theatre than to gain by having them present against the Russians, because we would lose a national morale point, the loss of Sana'a, we would lose prestige, and we'd also lose our investments in the region. So I think it's worth keeping these boys in place. And the other battle is at Misrata. Job done. The insurgency or the rebellion at Misrata has been dealt with. 950,000 men and the same number of casualties. Looks like they're mostly prisoners. Only 300 men lost from the Tripoli division. So that's good news. I've already ordered those chaps to move back to Tripoli, to their kind of station, if you like, and military control is returned to 100%. I'm just going to hover the mouse over a couple of other areas, and we can see that, yeah, Libya's pretty tight. 100% military control everywhere. Nothing to be too concerned about there. I think that's it in terms of military. I'm always reluctant to say that, because then something else sort of crops up that I think, oh, yep, of course I forgot that. Because of sort of our organisation really beginning to kind of, organisational morale and sort of this sort of thing is beginning to decline with our raiding fleet. They've been at sea now for a month or more, sometimes in difficult weather. We're going to move these guys back to Smyrna, allow them to sit tight for a period of time. I think we're going to set to evade battle, and we'll put them on a passive posture. And it takes them 8 days to get to Smyrna. That gives them another sort of 6 days or so, 5 days, however long. At least this part of this turn, to recover some organisation. And once they're back up 100% and the crew are fed and healthy and they've had some leave and the ships are restocked, we'll send them back out. We'll be conducting raiding operations again. It looks like, no, the Russians are still there. Okay, yes, the Russians do have a merchant fleet operating in the Mediterranean. It's just that we haven't spotted any of their ships yet. We haven't been in a position to engage them. So we'll fall back, get that raiding fleet organised again, and we'll consider moving back out. It might even be a consideration to look at switching commanders. We have got a commander here. This is Spotter, for example. Good hands-off naval strategist, unqualified unfortunately, but that just means he doesn't have very many command points. But it might be worthwhile giving him command of the raiding fleet. Let's have a look at the characteristics of Osman Pasha. He is a scouting cruiser admiral. Okay, so actually, I mean, he's quite adept at small raiding forces. Scouting, he's designed for frigates and small formations. Poor fleet tactician, however, and arrogant, which means that he has command points, kind of malice. Again, that doesn't feature too much of an issue because the forces he controls are very small indeed. Poor fleet tactician means initiative penalty. Okay, so yeah, not a terribly gifted admiral, I think, all things considered. We'll see how he goes. We'll give him another few months. We'll give him another crack of the whip, another attempt to sort of engage in some Russian merchants. In the last analysis, next time he goes out, look, he's got no excuses. The weather's clear, the med's completely clear now. He should be able to zero in on some Russian ships that are trading in the Mediterranean, and he's going to have to nail something. We want concrete results, so we're going to switch him out and send our reserve commander Mushavir to control the raiding fleet. Yeah, I think that's it. And now, in terms of economy, a bit of a quiet sort of 2 weeks in terms of turnover, really. Turnover's dipped ever so slightly. Let's have a look. 60 units sold, national market 243. That's not really the direction we want to be heading in. It does happen like that, though. There's always a little bit of variation. I think one of the reasons for that is we had a very small amount of manufactured goods left that might have eaten a little bit, because we do have manufactured goods to sell at quite a low quantity. In terms of their sale on the domestic market, manufactured goods, as far as we're concerned, are considered a premium. You know, like they're only available to really people that can afford it. We're not making them readily available because we actually need manufactured goods to reinvest in our industry, to build things. Once we're in a position where we have a number of manufactured goods factories, we've got really, really strong domestic production of this, then we can begin to open up manufactured goods to be much more available on the domestic market. But for the time being, we're still a pre-industrial society in the last analysis. We don't have the technological capacity to build factories. We're laying the foundations for a capitalist economy, and we're rooting our economy in the kind of rationale of capitalist production. And that, it's going to take a bit of time, but that will eventually begin to have an effect, and that will sort of, serve as a catalyst for the Industrial Revolution in the Ottoman Empire. In some ways, we've got to bear in mind that these kind of agricultural RGOs, this is like our enclosures period. This is our enclosures of the commons, but we can't wait 200 years to go from that to building factories. We're rooting our agriculture in sort of the rationale of capitalist production, and we're also building some capitalist manufactories, albeit sort of early modern ones, textile mills, very large textile mills, but built on a sort of capitalist basis. But with this will kind of accelerate, I think, or serve as a catalyst for our kind of industrial revolution. I think that's it for this term. There's nothing else to report, but I think to sort of break with tradition, since we are at war, and it seems fairly pointless just to sort of pass turn and then upload another video in a day. Let's sort of pass turn together, and we can then kind of receive news together, really, and see what happens. So we'll click past turn. I'm just quite sure that everything is done. I'm one of these players that becomes very anxious as my mouse hovers over proceed to next turn that I've missed something. So I'm going to very quickly read through reports. Yeah, there's nothing at all. Sort of, we don't have much state revenue. I should just point out very quickly before I do click past turn that I have not always depicted it in videos, but I have been conscientiously since March spending a significant amount of state revenue increasing our strategic reserve. So our strategic reserve now sits at 25 reserve regiments. It was very small, I think, at the beginning of this war. We always had a big strategic reserve of militia, reflecting, I suppose, men that had served in our older army. But in terms of professional line infantry, I can't remember what it was. It might have been 8 regiments or something like that. So we've more than doubled the size of our strategic reserve. And 25 is pretty good. It's always good to have about, I would always say about a third to half of the max number allowed, to ensure that, because it's really unlikely that all of your line infantry in your entire army are going to sustain massive losses. I could be wrong. A large part of our army is concentrated into one kind of deployment. So that's not entirely true, but of course, we can't hope to kind of replace losses in every single army corps on every front simultaneously. So 25 is good. I think we'll try and bring that up to about 40 by the end of the year, and I think 40 would be really, really, really good. That means that we'd have we could basically cater to. It's a bit like, I suppose, having money in a casino that covers the chips. Like if we have, say, 40 reserve regiments, that would cover about half of our army. If half of our army was not, completely wiped out, but had suffered hideous losses, we would very readily be able to replace them. What this reflects, our replacement pool, is in essence our durability, our capacity to sustain losses and this kind of thing. And that's an important part of warfare. Let's click past turn. And when you think about armies in the past, take sort of the army of the Roman Republic. It wasn't necessarily very adept at winning battles. It would often lose battles. It was capacity, its durability, its capacity to replace its losses, to reform legions, and so on and so forth, was really the basis for its kind of power. If you look at sort of the Punic Wars, Hannibal was able to win victory after victory against the Romans, and every year they could field new legions, So this is kind of what our replacement is. It's our kind of durability. Now, this is, of course, the beginning of the third war between the Ottoman Empire and Russia this century. The last war that the Ottoman Empire fought with Russia would have been within living memory. It was in, I think, 1828. So some of the older officers, many of our staff commanders, would have been relatively young men when that war happened. I mean, the Ottoman Empire would seem almost unrecognizable in many ways from that period. The Tanzimat period began in 39 and radically transformed kind of the court traditions and customs. And I'm reticent to say Europeanized, because the Ottoman Empire, like Russia, is arguably as European a power as any other, albeit quite different from a lot of Northern and Western European powers, but adopted very Western European customs. And, of course, established an entirely new army. Now, one of the reasons the Russians did so well, I think, in the kind of late 20s, is because their invasion was timed perfectly, really, to make most of the auspicious incident. The auspicious incident was when the Janissary Corps was completely annihilated. The Ottomans destroyed the Janissaries, and the Janissaries had been the professional core of their army from, really the very early modern times, the very early kind of history of its empire. And the Janissaries, as mentioned in a previous video, had been instrumental in the Ottoman Empire's ascendancy. The Janissaries weren't just professional soldiers, they were a part of a system called devshirme, which is where the Ottomans would kind of take slaves from their European provinces, Bulgaria, Greece, Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, and they were always children, and they were sent to an imperial college called Enderun in Constantinople. And Enderun had really two kind of components to it. One was to generate a bureaucracy, if you like, a kind of a professional civil service of eunuchs that couldn't reproduce, therefore ensuring that the timars, the military aristocracy, were always removed, if you like, one sort of removed from the centre of power. They never really controlled the reins of the state. It insulated the ruling house and ensured you couldn't have really powerful families established close to the centre of power. The other part of Enderun was the Janissary Corps. And I mean, God, in its infancy, it was like an unbeatable military force. These were children that were housed in the roughest parts of Constantinople. They were encouraged to engage in kind of gang warfare, running gang warfare with the kind of teenagers, the adolescents of Constantinople, to cultivate a kind of an esprit de corps. And in their adolescent years, they begin to be trained in hand-to-hand fighting, wrestling, and ultimately also trained in the systematic use of firearms. It was the first and only military force in the world at the time that drilled systematically in the use of firearms. So they weren't just professional soldiers, they had this kind of Spartanesque quality to them. And if you imagine what most European armies were like at the time, they would have been mostly drafted peasants who would fight for a campaign season. And the best parts of European armies, and talk about the armies of Hungary, Austria, Spain, and so on, the best parts would have been the nobility. And they weren't professional soldiers, they were amateurs. You spent most of their time in their castles and whatnot, eating and this kind of thing. And, they could afford armour and horses and this sort of thing. But the Janissaries would have considered them as amateurs. They would have just considered them as sort of, enthusiasts, really. And it was on the basis of the Janissaries that the Ottomans really established an empire that, at its height, at the reign by the time of Suleiman the Magnificent. I mean, in the west it went as far as Casablanca on the Atlantic coast, to Baghdad in the east, from the gates of Vienna in the north, to the source of the Nile in the south, or Aden, So it was an absolute colossus. But the basis for its kind of decline were the reforms that Suleiman implemented. One of the problems is the empire becomes so big that the system of devshirme and Enderun couldn't really cater for the size of the empire. You just couldn't kidnap that many people in the Balkans without having massive insurgencies and revolts. So one of the laws was to relax the criteria for entry into the bureaucracy and the Janissaries. You didn't have to be eunuchs anymore. They didn't have to be kidnapped children. Obviously, the system of devshirme still supplemented this, but you would have Turks, even members of the old sort of Timariot system, the Timars, the military aristocracy could join, Arabs could join. And this led really, initially it led to a short-term boon. It led to massively increased tax revenue because huge parts of the empire could actually be exploited and governed. And, oh my gosh, a Turkish defeat. Now that is a shame. And that is just outside Aden. It's a defeat, yet we've only suffered 500 sort of losses. Interesting. We'll have to have a look at the detailed reports of that. That is only on day 2, and that doesn't seem to include the Marine Division. So we'll see what happens there. Okay. We'll keep a careful eye on that. Let's have a look at this. I was rambling on, and we can now begin to see this. For anyone that's kind of like newish to the game as well, this gives a little bit of an insight. Okay, that's excellent. Gives a bit of insight into how the turns process, and That's good news. Yeah, okay, so the Marine Division kind of was able to wade in. It looks like the Cavalry Division that kind of sorted from the colonial fort. We suffered 1,400 losses, they suffered 1,100. That's good, though. It means they should fall back from the field, yep. So that's the Marines moving in from Hodeida. Okay, good. The main thing is really just looking for stabilization in the region for now. The Marines have done their job. That's 30,000 men in total, including, I suppose, the Cavalry Division and the garrison. So, yeah, we'll take that. That's good news. Oh, this is wonderful news. My gosh. So it looks like that sortie is very good news. How many have they lost? Oh my god, we've sunk ships containing 3,000 men, 3,000 horses, 24 cannons. Excellent. Yeah, so it looks like the Russians are trying to transport something. You know, they should have really escorted that force with combat ships. Didn't do it. We didn't suffer any losses. And, yeah. Oh, we sunk a portion of a cavalry division. I wonder if that was one of the cavalry divisions at Constanta. We're only on day 5. We'll pass turn and see what happens. That's great, though. That's exactly what we were looking to do by patrolling the Black Sea. That or engaging the Russian fleet. Excellent. Oh, wonderful. And we're sinking more transport ships containing 2 colonial regiments. That's probably an entire colonial brigade, I think. A brigade is comprised of 2 regiments and 1 light artillery battery. 6,000 men. Very good news. I mean, if Russian colonial troops, I'm assuming, will probably be comprised of soldiers from. Okay, we can see what's happening here. We can see a Russian force moving into play on the Black Sea coast. Yeah, I'm guessing Russian colonial troops are going to be from places like Kazakhstan, sort of Central Asia, this kind of thing. There still wasn't a battle at Adrianople, though, was there? But it looks like the Russians are moving to secure. I think that those transports, some of them, of course, we engaged and sunk. I think they were probably moving from the southern Caucasus. It may have been the force that was detached from the army that was besieging Kars. Russia hasn't pressed home its advantage in Kars. It hasn't looked to move against the citadel, which of course has some breaches. It's likely they would have broken down some of the fortress even further. The fortress in Kars is not a really developed fortress. It's quite an old-fashioned kind of fortress. It's sort of a pre-industrial fortress. But yeah, we'll have to inspect the situation. I really pray to God that Rita Pasha is activated, that we can actually use him. You'll notice that we're kind of currently located just over sort of Sri Lanka or Ceylon, as it would have been called then. This kind of constitutes, I suppose, what you would kind of consider intelligence reports. Okay, we're seeing Russian ships, transport ships move through. Rita Pasha is activated. Outstanding news. The Russian army looks like it has been beefed up slightly, and things are developing. Okay, so we have a Russian army in Varna, besieging the garrison there. The garrison, of course, does not have access to a fortress, and that looks like it's comprised of 2 cavalry, 3 cavalry divisions, and something else. It's comprised of about 4 divisions, so it's not going to be a small force. Not going to be a small force at all. Khurshid Pasha's excellent. He's in theatre. Let's attach him to that cavalry division, and let's see what the state the cavalry division is. Okay, so it's still receiving some replacements. I think we're going to lift that. We're going to lift that cavalry division and drop that into Rita Pasha's army. Actually, no, we'll leave it. We might as well just let it get to full strength. You know, there's no point being sort of rushing this, I don't think. Okay, let's evaluate the situation and read our reports then. In terms of news reports, we've got a railroad started in Spain. Russia's authorized a works program for roads to improve infrastructure. Military reports. We kind of already know what battles have taken place. Usually I go back and click on these, open them up for the benefit of anyone watching, but of course we have already opened these. Okay, so we can see that the Yemeni force is still in Sana. Let's combine the cavalry division with our marines, and let's set to an offensive posture. And what I'm going to start doing is getting some of these supply trucks out of Yemen, because I'm thinking that we have supply trucks sufficient there already, or supply trains, supply carriages, you know, and we're going to try and start moving these north, because my thinking is that our armies are going to start requiring the supply. Let's have a look. Okay, so Hussein Avni has taken over command. What's our command point allotment? Interesting. Now let's have a look at this army corps. That's really good news. I mean, it's arrived in the fortress at Erzurum. It's already recovered a lot of its strength, or a lot of its organisation. The structure at Kars is still partially breached. Let's have a look at supplies. They are beginning to dwindle. Ammunition's back up to 100%. That's because the force is drawing on the reserve supplies in the city. Those, of course, are soon enough going to start running out. Okay, let's get the cavalry division in play. 24. And let's have a look at the corps. What would be the case? That's a pretty big command penalty, isn't it? 24-32. Even if we remove these support forces, we'd still receive a fairly significant command penalty. Let's drop the cavalry division into the fortress, along with, actually, to tell you the truth, with an average cohesion gain of 2.23 a day, this force is going to have maximum cohesion anyway, even outside the fortress. And my thinking is, so with the cavalry division, actually. So let's, you'll notice that this video is probably slightly less kind of scripted, because I'm not really reflecting on events as I usually do, but just to mix things up a little bit. This is a war. I'm thinking, let's just play through a couple of turns, you know. We've got a bit of free time, make a slightly longer video, and we can mix things up. Partly also because, I mean, the game would last literally for years in real time if it did a kind of report for every fortnight of the Crimean War. But at the same time, I don't really want anyone to sort of miss what's happening. It'd, you know, be absurd to deliver a report in 2 months from now after 3 or 4 massive battles happened. So, yeah, let's play for a few turns. So we can see that we've had a nice prestige points boost from a couple of battles. And let's re-inspect this then, and what losses they received. So 6,000 there, 3,000 there. I mean, that's like nearly 10,000 troops, you know, sent to the bottom. Stupidly risky of the Russians, really. Yeah, stupidly risky of the Russians. I think we're going to send our fleet back now to Constantinople. And let's have a look at European kind of... So the British have got 4 transport squadrons moving in. They don't seem to have any troops on them. I can't see any troops on them, but it's curious as to what their plan is. It looks like the French have something here. So they've got a brigade, division to transport, 2 brigades of, one of Marines, one of Senegal Colonials, and a Escadre d'Otan. That's going to be a sort of supply, I guess a kind of supply train, a supply convoy. Okay, presumably they're going to be landing these somewhere in Anatolia. You know, the British and the French, being who they are unlikely to ask us any sort of permission or anything, I suppose. They'll just sort of do what they want. And that's fine. I mean, any help is welcome in the last analysis. Okay, that's good. So we've kind of like, we've gone through our military reports. Let's have a look at any kind of movements. We know that Khurshid has arrived in Muza's army. This is the movements of the Black Sea. So let's just quickly check then on... Okay, that's fine. So that's the raiding fleet. We'll keep those boys in Smyrna for the time being. Get their cohesion and organisation back up to scratch before we get them to sortie again into the Med on a kind of trade interception missions. Okay, no movements to speak of. We finished building a mission in Medina. Okay, so these are just some kind of colonial projects, there's ongoing kind of colonial structures. One thing I should mention then also is I used some state revenue to invest in another project, which is a fortress in Bulgaria. I'm thinking my next fortress is going to be, this is in Sofia, the capital of what is modern day Bulgaria, but our province of Bulgaria. And we're going to build another fortress in Salonika. My thinking is these are the depot towns So we want all of these fortified. This would create a kind of fortified belt in the Balkans that protects our logistics system, keeps it intact. It means that no small cavalry forces, these cavalry divisions might kind of make a move and try and, they'll be really hard pressed. I mean, a cavalry division is going to be really hard pressed to kind of take a large fortress of any kind of kind. Let's have a quick look at the Russian forces here. So these are just 2 brigades, okay. Slightly disorganized. This is probably the remnants of the force that was sunk landing in Constanza. So they're bringing in, they're bringing in forces, I think, from the southern. Based on the character of the forces, the fact that the colonial forces, Cossacks, I think they're bringing them in from the southern Balkans, the southern Crimea. Okay. Finally, Rita Pasha, after much pressure, after much goading, is now in a position to attack. Let's set him to offensive posture. Let's set him to attack at all costs. The Russian army, we can see their supplies are beginning to dwindle. This may have an impact on how sustained a combat they can engage in. Presumably, if their supplies are dwindling, their ammunition must be as well. They can't really replace their losses. They do have a pretty good kind of combat factor here, but this general is not a great defensive general. Let's remember, he's a really good offensive general. We don't want to miss this opportunity. Now, there's a really good chance he will engage in an offensive this turn also. Let's see what happens. I'm thinking we have the fresher force. We have all of our forces now stacked in commands where, they have commanders that can lend them their sort of skills and this sort of thing. Okay, that's good. Let's have a quick look at the economy. Mustafa Pasha has been congratulated on his actions. Yep, that's great news. Well deserved as well. That's the leading admiral in our kind of main fleet. We'll get him back in Constantinople now, I think, and he's going to be there for a month or 2, receiving supplies and so on. Let's have a quick look at our economy then. We are set to try and import as many manufactured goods really as we can kind of get our mitts on, and supplies. Let's scroll through the see what we're exporting. Consistently to tobacco, I think that's always going to happen. Lots of fish, that's good. Plenty of cereals. Yeah, excellent. I should point out also that we, because our relations are quite good with the British and the French, we sent the French a commercial agreement. The idea is we're just looking for trading partners that will consistently buy our goods. We don't have any special affection for the French or the British, frankly, but we want to cultivate them as allies, I think. Good exports, really, really good. We're getting supplies as well. How many units of supplies? 7 from the UK, 1 from America. That's good. Military supplies are important for conversion onto the map. And yeah, again, a slight sort of decrease in national market sales for the time being. Imports outstripping exports as well, but that is because we're looking to hoard manufactured goods as best we can. Okay, an okay turn economically. We expected some economic disruption on account of the war, also, so nothing to be too concerned about there. But we're now in a position to kind of counter-attack in the west. Fingers crossed for that, and we're going to be in a position to make a move in the east, I think very soon. In terms of our other reports, yeah, there's nothing else to be sort of too concerned about here. No significant developments. These are just kind of intelligence reports in terms of what other powers are doing. And yeah, nothing to be overly concerned about. Let's have a very quick look at our trade balance. And I'm a bit of a stickler for round figures. I may have mentioned this in a previous video, I'm not sure, but we want to make sure that we have ample stockpile of certain kinds of commodities for our population, and we'll of course look to export any surplus that we can. I tend to keep 20 cereals and fish behind, 15 fruits. At some point we're going to reactivate our canning factories to begin to sort of produce canned goods. At one point we had so many that they were just kind of vanishing into the ether, based on corruption and this sort of thing. Okay, good stuff. Yeah, getting a trickle of opium, coffee from Aden. That's good, from the kind of the trade stations we have there. And, these are going to be luxury items for the time being, until these resources can be properly exploited, and we still have some gems. They're also, let's have a look at our manpower, and what have we got? I think we're going to be in a position now to build 54 money, 10 steel, 21 manufactured goods. So let's build another let's build another fortress, beginning building another fortress at Salonika. So again, this kind of calcifies our logistics system, which I think is really, really important. Doesn't mean to say they can't fall. These are very simple fortresses, but you know, they're not industrial fortresses. I should actually look and see how long. Yeah, so it takes a while to actually build them. Although, you know, they can be used sort of straight away. You know, they become much more effective once they're completed. But yeah, their structures become partially used the moment we start building them, which is good news. Okay, let's pass one more turn then, and together kind of get to experience the outcome of what will be the second battle of Adrianople. Unless the Russians flee, yeah, we'll have to see what happens, I think. I think Ritsapash is, yeah, we'll keep him set to kind of intercept, just in case. My worry is now that the main Russian fleet sorties and engages, that could be quite a bit of a disaster. I think we're going to be okay. We're going to roll the dice, and just in case the fleet can engage anything on its way back, we don't really want it to engage a big Russian combat sort of patrol at this point, because you know, supplies, ammunition's becoming a bit depleted, and these guys are getting quite tired, exhausted. In fact, let's err on the side of caution, because ships are expensive to build. It takes a long time to build them. We'll retreat, we'll evade combat, and we're going to get these guys back into Constantinople. But there's no point in risking the fleet, because it just takes one daft mistake like that. I'd rather have access to this fleet again in the late summer, or sort of, you know, July, August time, at full strength, than to lose 4 or 5 ships now. So yeah, we'll leave that as it is. Just want to check steel imports momentarily, because our steel 5. Let's increase that to let's increase steel imports to 15 from northern Germany and France, and they have ample available, not much in the way of demands. Okay, good. Let's click past turn then. I'll ramble on some more. And I guess we'll part company in early June. I'll end the video then, once we've kind of read through our reports, and load up for today. So here we go, past turn. Yeah, and fingers tightly crossed. I'm rather anxious to see what happens in Adrianople. So yeah, Suleiman, what was I rambling on about? Suleiman sort of relaxed the criteria, really, for entry into Enderun, into the imperial bureaucracy and the Janissaries. And short term, this is good. You know, allowed the Ottomans to exploit more of their empire. It allowed for a significant expansion of the Janissaries. And by the time of Suleiman's reign, the Ottoman Empire was engaged in almost kind of perpetual warfare, not just against one power, but you know, many powers arrayed against them. The Empire of Spain, or the Kingdom of Spain, which is a huge empire at the time. You know, the great powers of Europe, really. Hungary, which was completely destroyed by the Ottomans ultimately. Austria, Russia in its infancy, and Venice. And even though the Ottoman Empire typically came off very well in all of these wars, it would always win its battles, and it was, you know, an absolute military colossus at this time. Suleiman saw that it was important that the army was expanded. The long-term effects of this, perhaps unforeseen, of course, is, well, one of the effects of the administration is decentralization. It really allowed for the system of the beys to become established, where local administrators could reproduce, hand their titles onto their sons. They would control their own sort of military force. And yeah, it became very, very difficult for the central government really to administer many of the territories. I mean, the end result of this is sort of what's happened in Egypt, really, and also Tunisia, where these regions have become completely independent, and it's hard to kind of get them back. And the beys would often use the interest of other European powers to secure their independence as well. So that was one of the kind of side effects. The other, of course, was really the Janissaries. I mean, the Janissaries began a relative decline anyway, in terms of their military effectiveness. By the 18th century, European line infantry had acquired a very professional character, I think. And by the 18th century, warfare was becoming, you know, a much more sort of scientific business. And the Janissaries, you know, they were no longer children. They were raised in this kind of Spartan-esque environment. They would be just, you know, men that would join the Janissaries. Young men would join from Turkey, from all over the Middle East. and they would not necessarily be raised as children to be soldiers. They were professional soldiers, so they would still be quite good. They'd be good compared to the rest of the Ottoman army. But they decreased in quality relative to European forces. I mean, by the time of the late 18th century, they were probably less effective than most line infantry from any other European army, and this showed. And they'd really just become a kind of, I suppose, a kind of bureaucratic clique. You know, I mean, they were an economic parasite. They would auction the throne, organize kind of routine coups and this sort of thing against any monarch that attempted to reform the army. So they inhibited the reform of the Ottoman army, and there was a big push during the time of the Napoleonic Wars to reform armies all over Europe. And the reason for this is because, of course, the success of Napoleonic France, which had developed the army corps system. So it wasn't unique to the Ottoman Empire that there was a sense of urgency and a real desire to reform armies in Austria, in Russia, Prussia, Spain, Britain. And this was one of the features of the Napoleonic Wars, that France eventually kind of lost, you know, the kind of qualitative edge that it had early on in the war was lost because other armies had imitated the French army, and the Ottomans were looking to do exactly the same thing. And it was during the reign of Selim III, I think he was deposed in 1808, in the midst of the Napoleonic Wars, really, that he understood the urgency that the Ottoman Empire had to try and form a new army, and he began to sort of organise the Nazim-i-Jadid, which was the kind of new order army, really. And in order to do this, he actually had to set up an entirely separate state exchequer. He couldn't fund it from the imperial purse because he was surrounded by people that, you know, were Janissary stooges that opposed these reforms. And this new order army, this professional army that was built along European lines, was very small. It was only about 10,000. And so they were really experimental units, and they engaged in some action. The Ottomans were involved in the Napoleonic Wars in a very limited way, and they came off quite well. You know, they didn't do very badly. They fought the French in the Levant to a limited extent. They didn't do quite as well in Egypt, although they had really largely lost control of Egypt by this point, or they were losing control of their own administration in Egypt. Once the Janissaries really got wind of the extent of the reforms that Selim had planned, they bumped him off, of course. Well, they deposed him and then bumped him off. And the last remaining member of the House of Osman was, I think, Mehmed II, who was the father of our current monarch. And he led an army into Constantinople. But he was a very clever political operator. He actually aligned with the Janissaries. You know, made it seem like he was their friend, their allies. He had no intention to reform the Janissaries, and he actually used the Janissaries to try and break down the system of the Beys, because he could see what's sort of happening in there. That's good. That's another victory. What are the casualties though? About 1,000 apiece. Okay, not too bad. It's a victory that's the main thing. But he could see what was happening with the system of the Beys. He used the Janissaries to break the system down, and then began to cultivate a kind of military alliance. He began to develop, not a military alliance, he began to develop alliances with the clergy, different sections of the kind of bureaucracy. But also, one thing he understood is that the Janissaries were despised by the population of Constantinople. They had always enjoyed legal immunity. They, you know, sort of rolled roughshod over the population of Constantinople. So at the time, really, of the move against the Janissaries, it was a complete surprise to the Janissaries, and a bit like a kind of Roman emperor, Mehmed II used really the power of the mob, and the Janissaries were completely annihilated. I mean, the Ottoman army shelled their garrison, the population was let loose on them, and they were completely destroyed. I mean, they didn't even survive as a secret society. They were all put to death. But the Russians invaded in the immediate aftermath, and we were defeated wholesale. They got to Adrianople, where they are now. They actually did a similar sort of move to what they've done this time round. They moved straight to Adrianople, took the city, and then sat outside Constantinople and kind of dictated terms. But anyway, so that's the story of the last war, really, that we had with Russia in the 1820s. At that time, we had no army, really. The professional corps of the army had been dissolved. Let's have a look. Day one. And that is outstanding news. Much closer, though, in terms of casualties, 20,000 apiece. Range or assault casualties, we destroyed one entire regiment. Yeah, their force sits at about 80,000 after their losses. That's excellent. That's really good news. Yeah, similar numbers of casualties. Let's get a more detailed breakdown. Only one round of combat, so it looks like the Russians have broken off fairly quickly. We have taken 10 companies of prisoners. That is 16. So that's about 1,600 men in terms of prisoners. Okay. Second Battle of Adrianople won then, by the looks of it, and we're day 7, so it looks like they've fallen back. If there's not been another battle, an additional kind of engagement there, it looks like we stung them, they fell back. Oh, I think that looks like it was a battle between the French. Ah, okay, so it looks like the French and the British are making a play for the Crimea. I wish I had sat on a fleet just outside Odessa, looking at them poor troops into this kind of this position here. Yeah, so they've fallen back to Romania. And yep, they've moved forces in to besiege Plevna, and they're beginning to kind of consolidate a sort of pocket here. You can see that this is still winnable though. Absolutely, it's going to take them a long time to take Plevna. Hopefully, we'll be in a position to promote one of our commanders, because Rita Pasha is sort of an ashtray on a motorbike, really, isn't he? But let's have a look. Their combat value still seems quite high. Their supplies are dwindling, but I think that's going to be over. Now they have this kind of contiguous territory, they're going to be able to receive supplies. That said, they're drawing quite a long way. I wonder if they are going to be able to receive supplies. There's a port here, but then they have nothing. They have nothing in the Black Sea. So, okay, let's have a look. Let's have a look at that again, more detail. Okay. One of the ways that you know if commanders are promotable is their kind of NATO icon flickers, sort of flashes here. Let's have a quick. Oh, okay. So the Imperial Guard took some decent casualties there. It's acquiring experience though. That's important. Abdul Karim seemingly unscathed. That's interesting. No congratulations in order. France refused our commercial agreement. Okay. Right, let's check Sana then. Let's just have a quick look at Aden. Yep, they've fallen back. That's good. Job done, I think. Let's set our supply convoy to move to Samaria. Get this supply force into the European theatre, and they've pulled back. Interesting. I wonder why they've done that. Abdi is not activated, because of course he's not. It'll take him 19 days. Okay, I have a bit of an idea. Let's see if Hussein Avni is activated. Yeah, he is, because he's a much more capable commander. 12 and 12. You know what? We'll set him to a conservative attack. 10 days, because he's a fast mover. Yeah, let's get Hussein Avni and his corps into Kars. Let's check the supply situation. Gosh, they're so close. Why have they pulled out? That's really curious. Janissary Corps. Cavalry and supply. And there was a French fleet here, wasn't there? It looks like a transport fleet as well. I wonder what the hell it was carrying and where it's deposited. Okay, let's try and examine what's happened. Like a kind of bit of a kid in the sweet shop after these turns. Right, let's get Hussein Avni into Kars. Even though it's going to take him longer, I wonder, yeah, 19 days, I don't fancy that. I wonder how long these forces would take if they weren't actually under command of an activated general. 18 days. Amazing, isn't it, that Abdi Pasha's unactivated command acts as a fetter. Let's move him retreat, can't even force march, but let's begin moving him anyway. I mean, what, the turn is 15 days. It means that a few days into the turn, he'll get there. Hopefully by then, Hussein Avenue will have kind of secured the area. That's really good news. It's interesting that they fell back. They decided not to press the issue. Although I suppose their scouts can see that a larger force is being built up in Erzurum. Perhaps they sense some kind of vulnerability. Perhaps the situation in Adrianople has decided made them decide they want to kind of relocate forces, and we can see they are building up forces now. These are division-sized forces to the north. These are smaller forces, kind of rear echelon forces, but it's a pretty good deployment. It's a really sensible deployment. They've got some forces in reserve here, so you can see they've moved very, very cleverly, really, to kind of set up a corridor, a supply corridor. Yeah, because Reza Pasha's not activated. So frustrating. Okay, let's have a look at our reserve corps. This cavalry division is now ready to join Reza Pasha's army again. It's been rebuilt. Let's assign Khurshid Pasha to that. And let's take the depleted one, deposit that. We'll change its posture also to ensure that supplies and such can get to it. Replacements, rather. See, the Imperial Guard is something that we really want to keep in our army. However, let's have a look at the Reserve Corps. Okay, let's deposit the Reserve Corps into Reza Pasha's army. It looks like the Imperial Guard has taken the heaviest losses, so we're going to remove the Imperial Guard, deposit them, and give Omar Pasha command of the reserve. Okay, good. That's the situation in the west, kind of stabilised in a sense. They've been removed from any kind of... They're no threat to Constantinople. They have fallen back. They now have a command penalty of 20. That's interesting. They are still under the command of Prince Paskovich, so my thinking there is that they have added other divisions that have obviously moved south. So they're kind of building their army up in a rather artificial way. They're just adding new units to the army to try and obviously offset the losses that they've sustained. Again, it's a real shame, real shame that how long would it take Reza Pasha to move? Only 6 days. I mean, if they are set to an offensive posture, they will engage his force. And it only takes his day. Yeah, let's do it. Let's hold at all costs. Just move in. Yeah, it takes 6 days. I think it's worth doing. Although my concern is we have a kind of march to the sound of the guns effect here. So what happens, I suppose, essentially, is if Reza Pasha's force is engaged here, even in a defensive posture, in 6 days' time he will experience some organisational loss, and these other forces can be brought to bear. They can actually move south and support Paskovich. Yeah, so it's a bit of a tricky one. Do I sit tight in Adrianople? Wait for replacements? Be very, very cautious. I mean, the structure is intact at Plevna. I don't think there's any real risk of Plevna falling anytime soon. What has gone on here? I didn't want to do that. Okay. I think we'll leave it there. We're going to sit tight in Plevna for the time being. Is the fleet in Istanbul? No, there we go. In 2 days it will be. Okay, yeah, I think we're going to be a little bit cautious. I think we're going to afford to be. I mean, Reza Pasha, hopefully he'll be activated in late June. But yeah, we're going to hold him tight. Partly because the Imperial Guard, which is of course our most effective force, has sustained some fairly heavy losses, particularly with the cavalry part of the Imperial Guard. We want to keep these guys back, I think, and get some replacements and get this kind of force organised and up to scratch. We can give that back to Omar Pasha. And I think we want to move north because we are looking at, an increasingly substantial force. I mean, their main army under Paskovich has sustained some losses. They have kind of got reserve divisions now that they can draw on a little bit. So I'm thinking that we want to move north with, the best, in the best possible way that we can. We don't want to kind of run things on a shoestring. We don't want to improvise. Because we are the weaker, in the last analysis, we are the weaker power. We have an army that is sort of half the size of the Russian army. So I think, let's move north when we're kind of comfortable to do so, when, we're fairly sure there's a really good chance that we're going to win a battle against Russia. In terms of other reports, let's have a look. We've already kind of dealt with Aden. Nothing really further to report there. Okay, we've finished building a textile shop in Constantinople. That's fantastic news. So, our first industrial structure is completed. A very, very small kind of output of 2 textile units per turn, but, I'll take it. When the shipyard is finished, one of those will be siphoned off to support the shipyard, but then we have another factory being built also, so that's fine. Okay, excellent. That's really, really good. Nice kind of economic development. It was a victory. I mean, in the last analysis, it wasn't the kind of victory I'd have hoped for. I'd have liked a really kind of overwhelming and devastating defeat of the Russian army. In this case, it looks like actually they were fairly, they suffered, 5,000 more casualties than we. Although we suffered quite a lot more cavalry. We seem to have an issue with kind of heavy cavalry losses, but we do have a much larger kind of cavalry arm than the Russians. The Russians only have 7,000. We have like 15,000 cavalry. Yeah, I would have liked a much more convincing defeat. The fact that it was only 1 round of combat suggests that the Russian force was kind of set to disengage at the earliest opportunity. I think they were looking to kind of get their rear secured ready before they could kind of fall back. So, pretty smart move, I suppose, the Russians didn't know what forces we have in the interior, so they've moved to secure the rear and then they're falling back. And yeah, it looks like they are kind of doing what I initially thought they would do, which is to kind of secure Plevna as a base for operations. This is all very salvageable. There's nothing to be too concerned about here. I think Varna's kind of a lost cause because it's not really a fortress. The garrison there is, as such, kind of doomed. Yeah, we'll keep a careful eye on things, and I think probably late June, hopefully, Rita Paschal will be in a position to kind of move. Let's have a quick look at our economy. Now, private capital is accumulating much slower because we're pushing really heavily for imports, so we're kind of using private capital really to try and kind of bolster our military situation by hoarding steel, manufactured goods and supplies. And in the last analysis, our state, represents the interest of these kind of these sort of Ottoman capitalists. So there's nothing really wrong with that. Yeah, okay, exports look reasonably good. Imports still outstripping exports. And 242. It is what it is. So domestic market sales have tapered off a little bit, although we have to bear in mind that a portion of our territory is controlled by the Russian army, so we're not going to be selling any goods. That no longer constitutes our domestic market, really. So, yeah, okay, it's somewhat kind of inevitable. In terms of other reports, nothing too significant. Let's check our kind of trade balance real quick then. So what should begin to happen now is we're going to begin to see an increase. We can already see an increase in textiles, which is good. I like to keep fruits at 15. A part of this kind of OCD-ness, really, it's much more just to do with, it's a way of kind of disciplining myself to check on commodities. It's very easy, I think, to be a kind of a bit of a lazy player. There's nothing wrong with that. And just to kind of ignore this stuff, and then you find out that you're not meeting domestic demand, or that you've missed a really great opportunity. And not all of these commodities export consistently. They go through kind of phases, You can have a period where there's no exports of like cereals for whatever reason. and you can kind of miss an opportunity if, like, you want to make sure that you always have your surplus available on the kind of market. So if there's a kind of certain trend in the global economy, that you're really well placed to exploit it. That's the real purpose of that. It's just to kind of like get a little bit of a discipline, really, of consistently kind of checking your assets balance, your trade balance, and all this sort of thing. Okay, this looks all fine then. The economy looks to be in kind of good shape. How many gems did we have? 2. Okay, that's fine. I think we'll leave that video there then. So yeah, an interesting kind of turn. The second battle of Adrianople was a success, and it was the second major battle of the war. It wasn't the sort of resounding success that we would like. The Russians obviously, you know, weren't up for a fight after their first experience, and I think they're looking to play a little bit safer now after what was really a rash opening move. Of course, that could have come off. It could have done very well if our force was partially formed here, or if we were strung out. You know, they might very well have kind of secured Adrianople, and then they'd really, you know, they'd be kind of well open to move on Constantinople. So it's likely that they just didn't realise we had our entire field army based here. Now they kind of know where we are. They're falling back. They're consolidating their rear, and they're going to be looking at kind of obviously getting the depot at Plevna, and this will provide them with a basis for other operations. We'll see what's going to happen with the Europeans. It looks like, yeah, I mean, European ships are beginning to kind of make an appearance. I'm just looking at military control. These regions still 100% Russian, so it's not as though European forces... I mean, we would see if European forces had landed, because they are our allies. I think let's just double check to make sure that it is the case, that we can see the deployments. Okay, we're not in a formal alliance. I think we're in a defensive alliance of some kind, so we can't actually... We don't have kind of intelligence access to British and French deployments just yet. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, you know, some of the situation might be kind of mitigated a little bit by British and French intervention somewhere. If they make a landing somewhere, this might draw off some of these forces. This may be the basis for their falling back from Kars. It may be that the Russians have been spooked by the appearance of British and French ships. So yeah, there's obviously a rationale for this, and we'll kind of follow this closely and see what happens. We can see now that our national morale has dipped just below 100. 100 is your optimal, normal amount of national morale. This happens gradually because of war weariness. Now, we can have a boost in national morale based on successful battles. At the moment, this has not happened. We have had successful battles, but not any that have awarded us any kind of national morale gain. War weariness can sometimes be mitigated by random events, like a kind of rallying to the flag and that sort of thing, but we need to keep an eye on national morale. We check our scores and objectives real quick. We can see that Russian national morale sits at 103. Now, I wonder why that is. Let's have a quick look at the situation in Sweden to the north. Yeah, they still don't sort of control any parts of Sweden. They don't have any depots in Lapland. This is all very kind of poorly developed territory, which makes me think they're never going to have large forces deployed here. But they have slightly higher national morale than us. I suppose in the last analysis, the war is kind of being fought in our territory. I think we're going to need a really, really convincing victory over the Russians, probably in the next couple of months, to kind of relieve the pressure and really soundly convince our population that we've kind of got a handle on things. I suppose in the last analysis, as far as they're concerned, there are really large Russian armies now based in eastern Bulgaria, you know, within a stone's throw from the capital. You know, possibly some of this fighting in Adrianople may even be audible to Constantinople. So yeah, there's probably no great reason for any big national morale gains. Let's make sure this... Let's just check on the raiding fleet real quick. Okay, they're almost there. We'll give them another fortnight just to make sure that when we leave port, we're in the best possible situation we can be to continue raiding in the central Mediterranean. So yeah, a bit of an unconventional video, a little bit less kind of scripted. I mean, none of my videos are actually scripted. I don't read from a script or anything, but obviously I have time to look at the turn, to reflect a little bit, and to have a more of a kind of, I suppose, more cogent kind of response to sort of, you know, what's happening, a bit more thoughtful response. I suppose playing it like this, you know, it's not a game that lends itself well to stream play, but we're out at war, so it's a bit more interesting and exciting to do it like this. This will obviously be a much longer video than most that I'd post up, and maybe we can kind of intermix it a little bit whilst we're at war. I think generally whilst we're at peace, you know, having kind of quarterly videos makes much more sense. We can follow, you know, we can follow events in, you know, in a more meaningful way. There's no point kind of covering every turn just covering economic administration, but during peacetime. But during wartime, I think it makes sense to kind of fairly closely follow the action and this sort of thing. And maybe every now and again I can do some videos like this to mix things up a little bit. They are longer. I appreciate, you know, people are going to be much less likely to kind of sit down for an hour or however long this video has lasted and watch an entire video of someone playing. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Probably the next one I won't do something of a similar length. I'll just deliver a report, and that report will be in late July 1852. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.